Yeah,
So,
reading is an interesting issue because in unschooling, as you know, children. uh, I have yet to find somebody who doesn't learn to read by the time they're a
yeah,
teenage, by the time they're 18, let's say. But the
yeah.
age of learning how to read varies tremendously, even within the
Oh,
same
yeah.
family. One child will learn to read at 4, and another one will learn to read at 10 or 11. So it isn't too uncommon for a kid to not know how to read by the age that if they were in school, they ought to be reading or they'd be way behind. That's not too uncommon, but it's not a problem because whenever they do learn to read, and for kids who don't learn to read later, I think it's largely because they're doing so many other interesting things that don't involve reading. They're developing other kinds of abilities, other parts of their brain, and so on and so forth.
It's actually hard to stop them. I
And
mean, what would
yeah,
you do to make sure a child would not learn to read? It would take a lot of effort,
I
actually,
think.
in this modern day. You're surrounded by texts all the time.
I did
How?
a little informal study that was just through my Psychology Today blog where I asked readers, I was looking for readers who had a child who had been diagnosed with dyslexia while they were in public school and who could not read while they were in public school and who was then taken out of public school for homeschooling or some kind of democratic schooling where reading wasn't an issue. And I asked them, so what I wanted to know is when you took the child out of school, what happened with their reading? So these were people diagnosed with dyslexia, which people believe it's not true, but people believe this is a brain disorder that prevents children from being able to learn how to read, or that they could only learn how to read if they're trained by a specialist who knows exactly how to train them, somebody who has this disorder. Well, I forget exactly how many responses I got, but it was about 15 responses, 12 or 15 responses, something like that. Maybe a biased sample, but in every single case that responded, they said, my child learned to read after I took them out of school, but not necessarily right away. And what was interesting to me is every one of them said the primary problem why my child wasn't reading was anxiety. The
Oh,
child
yes.
was so frightened of reading. The child, like if you're a slow reader, if you haven't learned how to read when the other kids can read and you're being called on to read in front of
Oh, yeah.
everybody, that's terrifying, and you can't do it. That's terrifying. So you develop this mental block. And then if you get a diagnosis, dyslexia, that's almost a relief. This is an
Yeah, yeah.
explanation,
And you're
right?
off the hook.
This is
Yeah.
you're off the hook. Yeah. Oh, I've got dyslexia. So and once you've got dyslexia, then sort of the motivation to learn how to read. I can't learn how to read. My brain is not capable of it. So
Yeah.
at any rate, what happens with all of these, what the parents said, one parent after another, is what I had to do was not ask him to read, not tell him to read. I read to him. I some of them initially tried to teach reading and they backed off because the child wouldn't do it. The child hates reading, doesn't want to do it. But everyone, if they backed off, they waited till the child wanted to learn to read. Some of the children just taught themselves. The parents didn't even know how they learned to read. They learned to read. And others asked for some help. Two or three of them used the kind of program that's been designed for dyslexia, but most of them did not. But even that program was useless until the child was ready to overcome, to want to learn how to read, and no longer was terrified by the idea of learning to read.